I don't know. We got to put that number 3, I guess, right? And then it's tariff. It is the day after so-called Liberation Day, and countries around the world are reacting. Canada's Prime Minister says the US is driving itself into a recession with its global trade war. Tariffs against Canada. Tariffs that were first levied on Canada and Mexico, and then on the world. There is still a huge tariff rivalry between the US and Canada. Most recently, the US imposed a 25% tariff on Canada. It was later said that an additional 10% would be added to this rate, but the White House announced that Canada would not be subjected to an additional 10% tariff. In retaliation for a similar measure by its neighbor, Canada announced that it was imposing a 25% tariff on some vehicles imported from the United States. President Trump, during our call last week, Canada will respond to the US auto tariffs. Canadian Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne confirmed that the new tariffs would be imposed, saying his country was responding to unfair and unreasonable tariffs. The Canadian auto tariffs come after Trump's 25% import duties on cars entering the US went into effect. 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. Tariffs on auto parts are scheduled to begin next month. These moves have been particularly painful for Canada, whose automotive industry is intertwined with the US. The result was 25% of the total duty paid by American importers on all goods from Canada. This duty was to be applied at lower rates for energy, potash, aluminum, and steel, except for those covered by the existing North American Free Trade Agreement. This rivalry and tension between the two sides normally led Canada to make a choice. Canada signaled that it would take unexpected decisions on tariffs, but also on automotive, fighter jets, missile systems, NORAD, and Arctic agreements. In other words, the Ottawa government announced its intention to gain an advantage over the US in 5 areas. We will now take a closer look at what these are and what alternatives Canada prefers to the US in these areas. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to be informed about our content. Let's start with the first item, automotive. US President Donald Trump's threats of tariffs on Canadian products entering the US and his plan to impose tariffs on imported steel and aluminum have alarmed the Canadian automotive industry. Simplifying our tariffs in steel and aluminum so that everyone can understand exactly what it means. Experts warned of possible work stoppages and supply chain disruptions. However, experts say that building cars in Canada is not the solution for the Canadian market, and that Canada should instead look outside the North-South corridor. Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, said Canada has a strong and thriving manufacturing sector with 5 global automakers. But the whole sector is designed around North-South integration. If it's entering a period of very protected domestic markets, it's very inefficient. It is extremely costly to do so because Canada is a relatively small market. Canadians buy less than 2 million vehicles each year, which is close to the number of vehicles the country produces, he said. But most of the cars assembled in Canada are destined for the US market. Trump has voiced his opposition to these exports, saying he prefers cars to be built into Detroit. Trade deficits. We're losing mass. We don't need their cars. They make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit. Since his inauguration on January 20th, the US president has threatened tariffs on the North American automotive industry 3 times. First, Trump promised a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods and a 10% tariff on energy. We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing, but announced a 30-day suspension of those duties as Canada sought to address US concerns about border security. Trump suggested that he would impose tariffs of up to 100% on Canadian-made automobiles if the US did not reach an agreement with Canada. On the same day, he announced a 25% tariff on imported steel and aluminum that will take effect on March 12th. But experts said the automotive industry has become so integrated over the past 60 years as a result of successive free trade agreements that auto parts cross the Canada-US border multiple times before leaving the assembly line. Experts also noted that tariffs that impede the free flow of parts between Canada and the US could lead to work stoppages due to disruptions in the cross-border supply chain. Building vehicles in Canada for the Canadian market is considered a cute idea, but it is not seen as a sustainable alternative. Canada, which has hit Tesla hard, has a project in this regard. Project Aero is a high-tech Canadian concept car, built to showcase Canada's ability to build electric vehicles. It has about 97% Canadian components, and about a third of its 50 part suppliers are located in Windsor. The car was showcased at the 2023 Canadian International Auto Show. Canada is not talking about building a car company from scratch. According to Ottawa, the last person to do so was Elon Musk with billions of dollars in capital. Now, with Trump's tariffs, Musk's fortune is dwindling by the day. Canada could use this to put more effort into building its own car. Today, Canada is home to major component manufacturers such as Magna International, which produces products for the global supply chain. So, the country has potential. We also see Canada turning to Australia to fill the other car gap. Dennis Darby, President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, reports that Australia has struggled for many years to compete in the automotive sector. The country has a free trade agreement with Asia, so it could be easy for Canada and Australia to get along on automobiles. Moving on to another item, it seems that the US and Canada have reached a point of separation on fighter jets. Canada has decided to reconsider the purchase of 88 F-35 fighter jets. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that they will review the purchase from Lockheed Martin, citing the Pentagon's control over the stealth aircraft, changing geopolitical dynamics, and the need to strengthen the domestic defense industry. In his meetings with our French President Macron and British Prime Minister Starmer, Carney discussed increasing defense cooperation with Europe and the implementation of some projects in Canada. Canada is considering revising the Lockheed Martin contract by exploring alternative procurement routes. However, this decision represents both an opportunity and a risk for Canada's defense industry. Experts warned that canceling the F-35 order could lead to economic retaliation from the United States. The company is a major exporter to the US, and many of its contracts are directly linked to the US. Against this backdrop of uncertainty, Lockheed Martin has made a new offer to keep Canada in the deal. The company has pledged to create more jobs in Canada if F-35 procurement continues. Canada has long been part of the F-35 program, and more than 110 Canadian companies have been involved to date. Lockheed Martin emphasizes that the program contributes to global economic growth and supports the development of the Canadian aerospace industry, but criticism of the F-35 program continues. Germany has proposed a review of the deal due to an alleged remote disabling mechanism in the aircraft, while Portugal has decided against buying the F-35 for geopolitical reasons. Canada has similarly announced that it is considering alternative jets. Lockheed Martin, along with the Joint Program Office, denied the allegations of remote deactivation in an attempt to prevent a possible drop in sales. However, it remains unclear how Ottawa will respond to this new offer. Canada is considering alternative jets, such as the Saab Green Eurofighter Typhoon and DAL Rafale. However, these aircraft do not have the stealth capabilities of the F-35. Canada may therefore turn to more advanced jets. The United Kingdom has made an offer to Canada on fighter jets. The UK has indicated that it is open to accepting Canada into the 6th Generation Global Combat Air Program, or GCAP. This offer has increased the likelihood of Canada choosing the UK over the US F-35. All these developments in the automotive and fighter jet sectors indicated that Canada was looking for different partnerships instead of the US. Canada's search for different partnerships is not limited to these. Canada's military leadership is pushing for a sole source deal for the US-made high-mobility artillery rocket system. But the country has other non-US-made alternatives. This brings us to item 3, missile systems. Kenneth Sadiku, spokesperson for the Department of National Defense, says the Long-Range Precision Striker project will significantly enhance Canada's defense capabilities both at home and abroad. In 2024, a Canadian Forces briefing on the Long-Range Precision Strike project indicated that the purchase of the equipment could cost up to $4.99 billion. The project included the purchase of launchers, fire control software, ammunition, and spare parts. Canadian defense suppliers have warned that the Canadian Armed Forces' effort to buy American equipment offers little benefit to domestic firms. One industry representative said the Canadian Armed Forces' efforts to purchase yet another piece of U.S. equipment showed how insensitive the military leadership was to the growing anger among Canadians who dislike U.S. attempts to take over the country. Defense analyst Stephen Watkins noted that the Royal Canadian Air Force has practiced carrying U.S. Marine Corps HIMARS since November 2024. But there are alternatives to HIMARS outside the U.S. One of them is the Precision and Universal Launch System, or PULS. The multi-arrow rocket launcher was developed by Israel's Elbit Systems. Elbit has also joined forces with Germany's KN and DS to develop a variant of the system for the European market. One idea was to use U.S. HIMARS and GMLR's weapons for the system, but Defense News reported last year that Lockheed Martin blocked the effort. Variants of PULS are in service or on order by Thailand, Spain, the Royal Danish Army, and the Royal Netherlands Army. In cases such as Spain, the systems are being built domestically. In January 2025, Israeli news media reported that Serbia had purchased PULS. On February 6, 2025, Elbit Systems Leodid announced the award of a contract worth approximately $57 million to supply Pole's rocket launcher artillery systems to the German armed forces. Under the contract, Elbit Systems, in cooperation with K and DS Deutschland, will deliver rocket artillery systems, including the development of associated adaptations and integration of German C4I equipment. These rocket launcher systems will undergo testing procedures performed by the German procurement agency, BAIBW, and associated technical test centers to obtain approval for in-service use in the German armed forces. According to Elbit, the systems will also be supported through in-service support. Canada could try this system. There are already different demands within the Ottawa government to replace the U.S. HIMARS. Another system that Canada could choose instead of HIMARS is the K239 Chunmoo. This South Korean rocket artillery system was developed in 2013 and is in service with the armies of South Korea, Poland, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. It is self-propelled, wheeled, and capable of launching rockets of various calibers. South Korea specializes in delivering systems quickly. Poland was to buy 22 systems, but increased the number to 290. The first 18 were delivered 2 years ago. The rest will be delivered by 2027. The K239 Chunmoo combines the mobility of the M142 HIMARS and the firepower of the M270 MLRS. Depending on the type of missile, its range varies from 80 kilometers to 290 kilometers. South Korean news media reported on February 25, 2025, that Estonia is considering the K239 Chunmoo, manufactured by Hanwha Aerospace, due to ongoing delays with HIMARS. While Estonia continues to negotiate with Lockheed Martin on delivery timelines, the possibility of turning to Hanwha Aerospace may materialize given that Poland and other countries prefer Chunmoo due to its delivery speed and after-sales support. This is where the K239 Chunmoo comes into play, but it is not yet clear whether the order will be realized. The Canadian side may also prefer this system instead of HIMARS. Now let's come to point 4. So we are talking about NOAD with or without cross-border tensions. There is growing talk in Washington that Canada and the United States could expand military cooperation on an intercontinental missile shield. At a U.S. Senate committee hearing last week, the issue came up when the top Democrat said he had received positive signals from Defense Minister Bill Blair that Canada could end decades of reluctance to join the U.S. missile defense system. Jack Reed of Rhode Island was talking about a U.S. plan for a multi-pronged upgrade of the system. The project is now called Iron Dome. This is a reference to Israel's existing but very different system. But at this late stage, there is now talk of Canada withdrawing from NORAD. Even U.S. commanders are considering it. General Gregory Guillot, head of the North American Aerospace Defense Command and U.S. Northern Command, said that Canada's withdrawal from NORAD would partially blind the Pentagon to enemy missiles at least until new defense systems are built. According to the commander, without Canada's radar bases, the northern approaches will be severely under-resourced and will suffer a significant loss of domain awareness and interception on the northern approaches, which are the fastest and easiest approaches that adversaries can take against North America. The future of NORAD, the world's only bational command, has been called into question amid Trump's threats to impose heavy tariffs and make America's northern neighbor its 51st state. In response, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney recently declared the end of the centuries-old US-Canada relationship. At a hearing before the House Armed Services Committee, Guo told lawmakers that everything NORAD does is intertwined with Canada, so the command would have to fundamentally change the way it conducts air defense and maritime warnings. General Gregory Guo also said that the US would have to spend heavily on radars, aircraft, and warships to rebuild its ability to detect incoming threats. But Guo argued that military relations between the United States and Canada are as strong as ever, and that he did not see the White House's position causing friction at NORAD. The US commander trusts Canada on this issue, but the situation could change at any time. Ottawa could completely break with Washington on this issue. Now, let's take the last item, the Arctic agreements. On the campaign trail and across the country, Donald Trump has created a new sense of urgency to unlock the potential of the North, or risk Arctic sovereignty and its treasured resources. It's no secret why, as all roads lead to Donald Trump lately. There is a narrative that Canada must start building roads, deep water ports, marine facilities, mines, power grids, and fiber optic networks as soon as possible, or risk ceding Arctic sovereignty and the northern treasure trove of critical minerals to a foreign power. The US is shaping its strategy in the Arctic according to this narrative. Gold, currently trading at around $3,000 an ounce, is the most striking element of competition in the region. Meanwhile, the Northwest Territories is home to more than 1,200 active mining sites, while Nunavut is thought to be home to up to 30% of Canada's oil reserves. According to the Fraser Institute's annual survey of 2023 mining companies, Yukon ranks among the top 10 territories worldwide for mineral endowment. All that said, the value of all this untouched treasure in the North starts in the trillions. Evidence of this newfound sense of urgency to stop talking about the Arctic and start doing something about it continues to emerge in none of it. Liberal leader Mark Carney, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh have stopped in Iqaluit in recent weeks. The politicians promised more infrastructure, better cooperation with the Inuit, increased military spending, investment in energy improvements and adequate housing, and increased Canadian ability to unleash the economic potential of the North. This promise likely included protecting Canada's interests in the Arctic. Whether the current generation can muster the will and money to implement large and ambitious projects that will protect Canada from international risks while advancing the Arctic and national prosperity could determine the country's long-term destiny. Today, the gorge is navigable for a period of time in summer and fall. The theory holds that as the world warms and more sea ice melts, the passage will become an increasingly attractive shipping route. So, it is important to control it. Canada's position is that the Northwest Passage belongs to Canada. To summarize, we are witnessing a gradual separation of Canada from the United States on almost all issues on the Arctic, NORAD, missile system, fighter jets, and automotive issues. Canada's position is becoming clearer. In fact, the reason for all this is tariff competition. If Trump had not initially targeted Canada, the US's neighbor and once its most important partner, with harsh tariffs, there is no telling whether this would have happened. What is known now is that Canada is charting a different course. Thank you for watching.
How would a sudden $5,000 increase on your next car purchase affect your budget? This isn't a distant possibility. It's a looming reality as trade tensions escalate between the US and its closest neighbors. Today, we're delving into a critical issue that could significantly impact your wallet: the potential rise in car prices due to new tariffs on automotive imports. President Trump's recent announcement of a 25% tariff on vehicles and parts imported from Canada and Mexico has sent shockwaves through the automotive industry. Analysts predict that this could add approximately $3,000 though, the cost of a new vehicle, with some estimates reaching up to $5,000. Chapter 1. The US-Canada Trade Conflict. For years, Canada and the US have shared one of the closest and most integrated